You think you know me, Derek? Think again. Emma Lawson's voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the bustling noise of the Manhattan cafe like a knife. Outside, autumn sunlight slanted through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced lazily in the warm air, and inside, the scent of roasted coffee beans and buttery croissants mingled with the faint tang of polished oak and leather-bound menus. She stood by the counter, her fingers brushing over the smooth ceramic of her latte cup, feeling the quiet tremor in her palm that came not from fear, but from the adrenaline of anticipation. Across the room, Derek Harrison leaned casually against the espresso machine, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, hair perfectly styled, a smirk playing across his lips as if he owned the world, unaware that the world he thought he controlled had already shifted beneath his feet. Emma's eyes tracked every detail, the glint of sunlight off his cufflinks, the subtle crease of impatience at the corner of his mouth, the way he exuded confidence that was both familiar and infuriating. Her heart thudded in a rhythm both steady and urgent, each beat echoing with the memory of betrayal, the sleepless nights when she had wondered how she could ever trust again, the silent tears shed in her tiny apartment on the Upper East Side while he paraded a younger, glamorous model as though her life had no value. But Emma was no longer the woman who had bowed to his whims or let herself be defined by his absence. She had rebuilt quietly, meticulously, and with a precision he could never have imagined. The tech startup she had nurtured from the ground up now flourished, a testament to her resilience, funded in secret by the inheritance left to her by her late grandmother, a hidden advantage she had wielded like a shield. Each step she took toward him was deliberate, measured, yet full of an undercurrent of unspoken power, her emerald green coat brushing against the polished floor, a slash of vibrant color against the muted tones of the cafe. She could feel his gaze, though he did not yet realize it, a physical weight pressing against her awareness, and she allowed herself a faint smile, the kind that hinted at secrets he would soon discover, the kind that carried the authority of someone who had been tested by fire and emerged unbroken. Around them, the world continued in oblivious motion, the barista's steaming milk, the clink of spoons against porcelain, the low murmur of conversations. But for Emma, it felt suspended, each detail amplified, each sound a drumbeat leading to a moment that would reshape the balance of power. Derek adjusted his tie, a subtle act of vanity, completely unaware that the quiet, composed woman standing before him was no longer the vulnerable, expectant wife he had once thought he had shattered. Her lips curved into a controlled smile, her chin lifted just enough to catch the light on the sharp line of her jaw, and she stepped forward, each movement a statement, a declaration. She was present, she was powerful, and she was no longer defined by his choices. The cafe seemed to hold its breath as the tension thickened, an invisible charge in the air, the kind that whispered of imminent revelation, and Emma's mind raced with the possibilities, the flicker of triumph hidden beneath her calm exterior, waiting for the perfect moment to unveil the truth that Derek would never see coming, that would shift his certainty into shock, leaving everyone wondering how someone so quiet, so seemingly ordinary, had quietly become a force that could not be ignored. And as she reached the threshold between table and counter, her hand rested lightly on the strap of her bag, the subtle gleam of her watch catching the sunlight, signaling that everything had changed, and Derek, still unaware, was about to find out exactly who Emma Lawson had become. The sunlight had shifted, softening as the afternoon settled over Manhattan, casting long amber streaks across the floor-to-ceiling windows of Emma Lawson's apartment, and she stood at the edge of her living space, overlooking the bustling streets below, a quiet triumph settling in her chest. In the months since leaving the life she once knew, she had immersed herself in the delicate architecture of her technology startup, balancing investor calls, product development meetings, and strategic planning sessions with an efficiency that left even her most trusted advisors in awe. The loft was filled with the hum of computers and the scent of fresh paper and polished wood, a stark contrast to the chaos of her past, and every object. Her minimalist desk, the neatly stacked prototypes, the soft leather chairs, was placed with purpose, reflecting the meticulous care she had poured into rebuilding her life. Memories surfaced unbidden, the quiet mornings of disappointment, The endless nights of watching Derek Harrison, once her partner and confidant, parade his new life across social media. The subtle, calculated cruelty of his indifference, and yet she had endured, each setback reinforcing her resolve, sharpening her vision of what she could become. Friends she had reconnected with, those who remembered the woman she had been before betrayal had clouded her world, offered encouragement that was quiet but steady, a lifeline that tethered her to the belief that she could rise above the shadow of her past. Each meeting she led, each investment she secured, was more than business. It was a reclamation of self, a declaration that she was no longer defined by the choices or actions of another. As the day progressed, she reviewed the preparations for the gala that evening, her fingers brushing over the invitation, the embossed card a symbol of both opportunity and challenge, knowing that Derek would be there, expecting her to shrink into the background, assuming that the woman he once dismissed was still small, still afraid. The thrill of anticipation coursed through her as she envisioned the moment she would enter, the subtle play of power and elegance she could project without uttering a word, every glance, every gesture choreographed to convey strength and presence. The apartment grew quiet as the city below hustled on, unaware of the storm about to unfold in the ballroom, and Emma allowed herself a moment to breathe, to feel the weight of her accomplishments, to acknowledge the transformation she had undergone, the hidden identity as a tech heiress that she had nurtured in secret. As evening approached, she dressed carefully, the soft silk of her gown a deep, commanding hue that caught the light in ways that spoke of sophistication and quiet authority, each accessory selected to complement, not distract, her poised composure, and she checked her reflection, noting the calm intensity in her eyes, the subtle lift of her chin, the way her posture projected the woman she had become. The city lights began to twinkle as she stepped into the limousine waiting below, the hum of the engine a low, comforting reassurance, and she let herself imagine the reactions to come, the surprise and recognition that would ripple through the room when she walked in, not as the woman who had been hurt and abandoned, but as someone powerful, successful, and untouchable in ways Derek could not foresee. And in that controlled, silent anticipation, the tension built, the air thick with unspoken possibilities, and Emma Lawson, once underestimated and dismissed, felt the full measure of her readiness, poised to move forward, unstoppable, as the streets of Manhattan blurred past, carrying her toward a moment that would change everything. The grand ballroom of the Starlight Hotel shimmered under crystal chandeliers, the warm glow reflecting off polished marble floors and catching the glint of sequin gowns and tailored suits as Emma Lawson stepped through the double doors, each click of her heels a deliberate punctuation in the silence that seemed to fall over the room. Conversations stuttered, glasses paused mid-air, and every gaze instinctively turned toward her, drawn not only by the vivid emerald hue of her gown, but by the aura of confidence and authority she carried with effortless grace. Derek Harrison stood near the center of the room, arm linked with his new companion, a model whose laughter tinkled like glass, but even her brightness could not command the attention that now clung to Emma, a magnetic pull impossible to ignore. Her eyes swept the crowd, taking in familiar faces who had once whispered, judged, or dismissed her, and now they hesitated, struck by the undeniable presence of a woman transformed, someone who had endured and emerged stronger, wiser, and radiant in a way that demanded acknowledgement without a single word spoken. Each step toward the center of the ballroom was a measured act, a choreography of silent power, and as she approached the main dais, her posture impeccable, her gaze unwavering, Derek's smirk faltered imperceptibly, the first crack in the armor of his certainty. The murmurs rose like a swell, the subtle tension building as Emma's hand rested lightly on the strap of her clutch, the deep green silk of her dress catching the light in ways that accentuated the commanding angles of her figure and the quiet strength in her stance. A soft hush fell when she reached the top of the steps, and the event organizers, aware of the subtle electricity in the air, introduced her as a special guest and investor, the words flowing over the crowd like a ripple that turned into a wave, carrying recognition and surprise. Derek's eyes widened just enough for the room to notice, his voice caught in mid-phrase as the realization crystallized. The woman he had underestimated, The one he thought vulnerable and powerless was now a formidable force with resources, influence, and presence far beyond his imagination. Emma offered a composed, fleeting smile, not of malice but of quiet triumph, letting the silence speak volumes where words would have diminished the impact, and she allowed herself a brief internal acknowledgement of the journey that had brought her here, the sleepless nights, the painstaking rebuilding, the courage to claim her own destiny. Around her, the room seemed suspended in that precise instant, a tableau of astonishment, respect, and unspoken questions, and as the band struck up a subtle note in the background, Emma's gaze met Derek's for the briefest heartbeat, steady and unwavering, conveying everything without uttering a syllable. The past was gone, the present belonged to her, and the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The camera of perception lingers on her poised figure, the emerald gown flowing like liquid authority, the faint sparkle of her watch catching the chandelier light, the faint exhale of the crowd barely perceptible, and the tension remains taut, leaving the promise of revelation hanging just out of reach, an unspoken question that stretches beyond the frame. How will the night unfold as the echoes of old decisions confront the undeniable force of a woman who has reclaimed her story, her power, and her place among those who once doubted her? The soft hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses filled the Starlight Hotel ballroom as Emma Lawson moved gracefully through the crowd, her gaze sweeping over familiar faces and measuring every subtle reaction. Each step was deliberate, a silent proclamation of authority and control, the deep emerald silk of her gown catching the light and commanding attention without a single word. Derek Harrison, standing near the grand staircase, shifted slightly, the confident poise he once carried effortlessly now tempered with a flicker of uncertainty as he noted the ripple of surprise and quiet admiration that followed Emma through the room. She paused briefly to exchange polite nods with several guests, her smile measured and calm, yet charged with the latent energy of a woman who had endured, adapted, and emerged stronger than anyone could have anticipated. The band played softly in the background, the notes floating through the air like a gentle tide. Yet, beneath the surface, tension coiled tightly, the unspoken recognition that the dynamics had shifted irreversibly. Emma approached the presentation area, where a small podium had been arranged for investor introductions, and the event organizer stepped forward, offering a graceful introduction that carried her name, her position, and her influence across the room. The words settled over the crowd, a subtle wave of realization and intrigue passing through attendees who had previously underestimated her. Derek's smirk wavered for the first time as the implications became clear. This was not the timid, overwhelmed woman he had left behind, but a force of intellect, power, and unyielding presence. Emma allowed herself a moment to inhale the atmosphere, the scent of polished wood, fine linens, and subtle cologne blending in the air, anchoring her awareness in the richness of the present moment, a stark contrast to the shadow of betrayal she had once endured. As she extended a hand to greet a fellow investor, her movements were fluid, graceful, and intentional, each gesture reflecting both confidence and a quiet assertion of her reclaimed identity. Derek's eyes followed her, unblinking, as subtle murmurs and glances passed through the room, guests exchanging puzzled yet admiring looks at the transformation that lay before them. Emma maintained a composed exterior, letting silence convey what words never could, and with a subtle shift of her posture, a light lift of her chin, she projected an image of someone completely in command of her narrative and her destiny. The chandeliers above caught the shimmer of her dress, the light glinting like a halo that underscored her presence, and the room collectively held its breath, the hum of anticipation thickening as the reality settled. The woman who had once been abandoned, overlooked, and underestimated now stood at the center of attention, a testament to resilience, ingenuity, and unspoken power. In her wake, a current of tension weaving through the crowd, as if the air itself recognized the shift in power. The subtle fragrance of her perfume, a blend of jasmine and soft cedarwood, lingered in the space, drawing attention without a word, and the light from the chandeliers caught the shimmer of her emerald gown, highlighting the quiet strength she radiated. Guests who had once doubted her paused mid-conversation, glances exchanging silently, as they registered the presence of someone who had clearly endured and emerged transformed. Derek Harrison, standing rigid near the grand staircase, felt the gaze of those around him shift, an imperceptible tightening of the jaw and a slight narrowing of the eyes betraying the surprise and discomfort he could not conceal. Emma's movements were deliberate, controlled, each step measured, yet flowing with a natural ease that communicated confidence, authority, and grace. And as she approached the podium, she could feel the weight of expectation and curiosity settling over the room like a tangible force. The event organizer stepped aside with a gracious nod, introducing her as a major investor and prominent tech innovator, the words rippling through the audience and drawing audible reactions of surprise and admiration, the undertone of astonishment unmistakable even beneath polite claps and murmured comments. Derek's eyes widened slightly, the smirk he had carried all evening faltering as realization dawned, and Emma allowed herself a brief, composed smile, the corners of her lips lifting just enough to convey quiet triumph and controlled satisfaction, letting silence do the work that words could not. The crowd responded instinctively, eyes following her, conversations softening, the room attuned to the quiet authority she exuded, and with each step toward her destination, the tension mounted, a current of anticipation coiling tightly, as everyone sensed that the next moments would redefine perceptions, not with loud declarations or confrontation, but through the presence, poise, and unspoken strength of a woman who had endured, overcome, and now held the attention and respect that had once been denied. As she reached the center, the music softened, and all eyes turned, the camera of perception capturing the balance of elegance, authority, and quiet victory, leaving an open question in the minds of all present. What choices and revelations would unfold next as Emma Lawson continued to command the space with her unshakable presence, poised to step fully into the life she had fought to reclaim? The lights in the ballroom softened as the evening progressed, casting a warm glow that danced across the polished marble floors and the delicate crystal of the chandeliers, highlighting the sophisticated crowd gathered in anticipation. Emma Lawson remained poised, each movement calculated yet fluid, her emerald gown flowing with the rhythm of her steps as she approached the center of attention, the subtle hum of conversation shifting as guests turned to follow her presence, curiosity and admiration mingling in their expressions. Derek Harrison stood slightly apart, a glass of champagne in hand, his posture taut with the recognition that the woman before him was no longer the one he had underestimated. Every gesture, every glance she cast carried authority, composure, and an undeniable sense of accomplishment. Emma's eyes scanned the room with measured awareness, noting who observed, who whispered, and who faltered under the realization of her transformation, each interaction a quiet reinforcement of the power she had reclaimed. The scent of polished wood and soft linen mixed with the faint aroma of her perfume, jasmine and cedar entwined, lending an intangible elegance that drew attention without a word. And as she moved toward the podium to address the crowd of investors and colleagues, her presence alone seemed to command focus, the subtle lift of her chin and straightening of her shoulders signaling control and readiness. She offered polite nods and brief smiles, gestures imbued with confidence and the quiet assertion of her reclaimed identity, and the murmurs of the crowd grew as the impact of her presence became undeniable, each guest registering the woman who had endured hardship and emerged stronger, sharper, and fully in command of her narrative. Derek's expression, once self-assured and smug, shifted as recognition and disbelief flickered across his features, the careful image of certainty he had maintained unraveling under the weight of Emma's composed power. And as she paused at the top of the steps, the organizers formally introducing her as a leading investor in the technology sector, a wave of admiration and surprise swept through the room, echoing the realization that the quiet, wronged wife of months past had become a figure of influence and unspoken authority. Emma allowed herself a moment of silent acknowledgement. The journey that had led her here, the long nights, the meticulous planning, the perseverance against doubt and adversity, flashing through her mind like a brief montage, each memory reinforcing the calm intensity she projected now. Her gaze met Derek's across the room for the briefest heartbeat, steady and unflinching, conveying her triumph without a single word, and the crowd collectively held its breath, sensing the subtle shift in power, the tension and anticipation thickening as the evening continued, leaving an unspoken question hanging in the air. How would the night unfold as past decisions and present authority intersected? The balance irrevocably altered by the woman who had reclaimed her story, her influence, and her place in a world that had once dismissed her. Emma Lawson lingered near the podium, the soft hum of conversation weaving around her like a distant current, the chandelier light reflecting off the polished marble and catching the subtle shimmer of her emerald gown, accentuating her poised composure. Guests exchanged glances, whispers floating just above the music, each reaction a silent acknowledgement of the transformation that had taken place. The woman once dismissed now commanding the attention of everyone in the room without a single raised voice. Derek Harrison shifted uneasily, his hand tightening around the stem of his champagne flute, a micro-expression of surprise and recognition crossing his face as he realized that the quiet, composed figure he had underestimated was now an authority in her own right, a woman whose presence alone altered the dynamics of the space. Emma's gaze swept across the room, taking in the subtle gestures of admiration, the momentary falters of attention among those who had previously overlooked her, and she allowed herself a controlled smile. A brief acknowledgement of the power she now wielded through presence and achievement. The ambient lighting softened the edges of the room, and the subtle sense of polished wood, jasmine, and cedar combined with the murmur of polite conversation to create an atmosphere of tension and anticipation, a suspended moment in time where the past and present collided. She stepped lightly toward the center, her posture deliberate and confident, each step measured as though choreographed, yet flowing naturally, and with each movement, the collective awareness of her authority grew, the room attuned to the aura she projected. Derek's eyes followed every detail, the shift in her expression, the tilt of her chin, the precise way she carried herself, each element reinforcing the undeniable statement she was making without a word. Emma's thoughts were calm, steady, reflecting on the long journey that had brought her here, the months of meticulous planning, the persistence against doubt, the resilience built in quiet moments of solitude, all culminating in this precise instant where recognition and respect flowed effortlessly around her. She approached the dais with measured grace, nodding politely to familiar faces while acknowledging the unspoken impact of her presence. And as the event organizer formally welcomed her, the murmur of surprise and admiration intensified, the energy in the room stretching taut with anticipation. Emma paused briefly, allowing the room to absorb the statement she made through posture, composure, and quiet confidence, her eyes meeting Derek's for the briefest moment, conveying more than words ever could. She had endured, she had transformed, and she now held the balance of power subtly but completely. The room collectively held its breath, the soft strains of the music beneath the murmur of voices underscoring the tension, and in that poised, controlled instant, Emma Lawson embodied the realization that triumph need not be loud to be undeniable, leaving the evening suspended with the question of what revelations, alliances, and acknowledgments would unfold next as her presence reshaped perceptions and commanded respect from all who bore witness. The evening deepened, the golden light of the chandeliers casting long reflections across the marble floors and gilded accents of the Starlight Hotel ballroom, and Emma Lawson continued her measured walk through the crowd, each step deliberate, precise, as if choreographed to convey not only grace but the undeniable presence of authority she now wielded. Conversations softened and turned toward her, the gentle murmur of intrigue weaving through the soft strains of the orchestra, a subtle recognition rippling through the gathering that this woman, once overlooked and underestimated, was now a figure of quiet command. Derek Harrison's gaze followed her from across the room, a flicker of unease and disbelief passing over his expression as he noted the confidence that emanated from her with every poised movement, the control of her posture, the calm intensity in her eyes that left no doubt about the transformation she had achieved. Emma paused briefly near the center, her eyes sweeping over familiar faces, noting the subtle reactions of surprise, admiration, and reflection, The way even casual glances were charged with the acknowledgement of her evolution, and she allowed herself a faint, controlled smile, a silent statement of triumph that required no words. The air was rich with the scents of polished wood, fine linens, and soft cologne, mingling with the quiet hum of polite conversation. The room suspended in a moment of subtle tension and anticipation as she moved toward the presentation area. Each gesture, from the tilt of her chin to the measured placement of her hands on the podium, radiated control and self-possession, and as the organizers formally introduced her as a prominent investor and leader in the technology sector, the room reacted, whispers and exclamations of recognition weaving together, a wave of realization passing through attendees that this woman expression reinforced the undeniable reality. She had reclaimed her narrative, her authority, and her position, leaving those who had once underestimated her, including Derek Harrison, to reckon silently with the undeniable force she now represented, the moment lingering in the air like a held breath, the question of what would follow suspended but electrifying, a promise of revelation and recognition yet to unfold. The soft golden light of the chandeliers reflected across the marble floors, catching the subtle shimmer of Emma Lawson's emerald gown as she moved with deliberate grace toward the front of the room, every step a quiet assertion of the authority and composure she now embodied. Conversations hushed momentarily as heads turned, whispers trailing in her wake, a ripple of attention spreading through the crowd like an unspoken current, and Derek Harrison's expression tightened imperceptibly as he watched, the smirk he had carried faltering under the weight of recognition and surprise. Emma's gaze swept the room with calm precision, noting the subtle reactions of familiar faces, the momentary pauses, the softened expressions of awe and quiet admiration, each acknowledgement a testament to the journey she had undertaken, the resilience and strategy that had brought her to this exact point. She paused at the podium, adjusting the sleek lines of her gown with a smooth motion that conveyed confidence without effort, her eyes scanning the audience, projecting control and quiet power that required no voice to assert. The ambient music continued, a gentle undercurrent to the murmurs that now carried tones of curiosity and respect, the soft scent of polished wood, delicate linen, and her subtle jasmine fragrance blending to create an atmosphere charged with tension and anticipation. Derek's posture remained rigid, the slight narrowing of his eyes and the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw betraying his growing awareness that the woman before him was no longer the one he had dismissed, the quiet strength and measured composure radiating from her in waves that reached across the room. Emma allowed herself a small, composed smile, the kind that conveyed triumph and command without arrogance, each gesture and tilt of the head reinforcing the unspoken narrative of perseverance, growth, and mastery over the circumstances that had once defined her. Guests who had previously underestimated her now observed with fascination, their subtle glances and whispered comments underscoring the shift in perception, and as Emma lifted her chin slightly and let her gaze linger for a heartbeat on Derek, the room collectively felt the silent assertion of her reclaimed identity and influence. Every movement, every careful placement of her hands, every confident step toward the center was imbued with purpose, signaling that she had emerged not just unbroken but elevated, her presence alone altering the energy and attention of the space. The room seemed to hold its collective breath as she acknowledged the audience with a nod, the quiet authority she exuded resonating beyond the murmurs and glances, and the orchestral strains of the background music enhanced the poised tension, wrapping the moment in anticipation and expectation. Emma's awareness remained sharp, every sense attuned to the subtle shifts around her, the way her transformation had redefined interactions, the nuanced expressions of recognition and astonishment now directed toward her. The soft clink of glasses and subdued conversations created a backdrop that accentuated the power of her presence. And as she positioned herself fully in view, the balance of influence in the room had undeniably shifted, the unspoken challenge hanging in the air, leaving all present to ponder what would follow as the woman who had endured, adapted, and risen now commanded attention and respect effortlessly. Every element of her poise, grace, and strategic composure reinforcing the irrevocable transformation she had achieved. The air in the Starlight Hotel ballroom shifted subtly as Emma Lawson continued her movement through the crowd, each step measured, precise, and fluid. The hem of her emerald gown sweeping lightly over the marble, commanding attention without uttering a word. Conversations paused and glances followed, the hum of polite chatter punctuated by the soft clink of glasses, as guests registered the quiet authority and composed elegance she radiated, a stark contrast to the earlier whispers of doubt that had once surrounded her presence. Derek Harrison's posture, previously rigid and confident, displayed a subtle tension, his sharp blue eyes tracking her every motion, a flicker of disbelief crossing his expression as he took in the transformation. The unspoken realization that the woman he had dismissed and left behind now held a power he could neither anticipate nor control. Emma's gaze moved deliberately across the room, noting expressions, measuring reactions, absorbing the awareness that her silent assertion of presence was shifting the energy, and she allowed a brief, composed smile to pass her lips, an acknowledgement of the control and influence she now exerted. The soft scent of polished wood and fine linens mingled with the delicate notes of jasmine in her perfume, enveloping the space with subtle elegance, reinforcing her presence as she approached the presentation area, the murmurs of recognition growing among those who had underestimated her. As she reached the front, the organizers introduced her as a key investor and innovator, the words resonating throughout the room, drawing gasps, whispers, and discreet nods from the crowd, a collective acknowledgement of the woman who had endured betrayal and transformed adversity into authority. Emma's posture remained impeccable, shoulders back, chin lifted, eyes steady and commanding, every gesture calculated to convey assurance and mastery of her surroundings. Derek's lips pressed into a thin line, the confidence that had once defined him now replaced with a quiet awareness that the balance had irrevocably shifted, each subtle movement of Emma reinforcing her reclaimed identity and influence. The audience, caught between admiration and fascination, adjusted their attention, observing her with an appreciation born not of spectacle, but of the undeniable presence of a woman who had emerged from struggle with poise and intelligence. Music played softly in the background, accentuating the atmosphere of controlled elegance, the tension coiling like a silent thread among the guests as the implications of Emma's transformation settled in. She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her achievement resonate in the room, the subtle interactions and glances around her affirming the power of her silent authority. Each calculated step, every nuanced tilt of her head, every confident exchange with a guest reinforced the undeniable statement she had become, leaving a palpable question in the air about what would follow next. How Derek and the rest of the room would adjust to the reality that Emma Lawson had not only reclaimed her narrative, but now dictated the terms of attention, respect, and recognition with effortless poise. Emma Lawson stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, the soft hum of conversations and the faint strains of the orchestra surrounding her, yet her focus was unshakable, every step measured, every breath deliberate, conveying a quiet confidence that demanded attention. The chandeliers above cast a golden glow across the polished marble floors, illuminating the subtle shimmer of her emerald gown and highlighting the composed authority she carried effortlessly. Derek Harrison watched from across the room, his posture stiffening, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features as he recognized the transformation, the poise, and the undeniable presence of the woman he had once underestimated. Emma's gaze swept the crowd, noting the shifts in attention, the softened expressions of surprise and admiration, and she allowed herself a controlled, faint smile, a silent acknowledgement of the power she now wielded without confrontation. Guests who had previously whispered or doubted her now found themselves drawn to her, their attention captured by the subtle grace and unwavering strength she exuded, the way her movements commanded the space without effort. The room carried a tension that was almost tangible, a blend of anticipation and respect, as Emma moved closer to the center, her presence recalibrating the energy of the gathering. She adjusted the drape of her gown with a fluid motion, lifting her chin slightly to convey both elegance and authority, and as the organizers formally acknowledged her role as a major investor and innovator, a ripple of recognition and surprise spread through the audience. the whispers carrying admiration for the transformation they were witnessing. Derek's eyes remained fixed on her, each subtle gesture reinforcing the realization that the woman before him was not only unbroken but elevated, her composure and confidence an unspoken declaration of triumph and resilience. Emma's every movement, from the placement of her hands to the measured rhythm of her steps, projected control and assurance, and the air seemed to adjust around her, the background murmur fading into a quiet respect as her silent command filled the space. The subtle scent of jasmine and cedarwood she wore mingled with the ambient aroma of polished wood and linen, enhancing the impression of elegance and deliberate presence. And as she paused to acknowledge the audience with a slight nod, the collective awareness of her authority grew, the room attentive to her every nuance. Each glance she exchanged, each soft motion, reinforced the narrative of perseverance, strategic foresight, and quiet power that had brought her to this point, leaving the attendees, including Derek, to reckon with the undeniable reality of her transformation. The orchestral notes swelled gently in the background, accentuating the poised tension, the anticipation of what would follow lingering in the air as Emma Lawson, fully in command of her narrative and identity, prepared to navigate the evening with precision, leaving an unspoken question hanging over the gathering. How would the culmination of past decisions, present recognition, and silent authority shape the remainder of this night? And what revelations would continue to unfold as she moved gracefully among those who had once doubted her, now witnessing her unassailable strength and poised command? The ballroom fell into a quiet, expectant hush as Emma Lawson moved with deliberate elegance to the center of the room, the soft light of the chandeliers glinting off the polished marble and reflecting in the subtle shimmer of her emerald gown. Each step she took was precise, controlled, a silent assertion of the authority and presence she now commanded, the gentle click of her heels a metronome marking her poise and quiet confidence. Conversations softened as whispers followed her, heads turning, and the murmurs of admiration interlaced with hints of surprise, acknowledging the transformation of a woman who had once been dismissed, underestimated, and overlooked. Derek Harrison's gaze remained fixed on her, the practiced ease and smugness he once carried replaced by a flicker of uncertainty and disbelief, the realization settling that the woman before him was no longer the one he thought he knew. Emma's eyes swept the room with calm assessment, taking note of every subtle reaction, every glance, and every micro-expression, letting each observation reinforce her awareness of the silent power she now held. The scent of polished wood, soft linen, and her delicate jasmine perfume created an atmosphere of understated elegance, enhancing her presence without drawing attention to anything beyond her quiet command of the space. Guests, previously doubtful or dismissive, found themselves captivated by the controlled grace and authority she exuded, their attention held by the assurance in her posture, the steady rhythm of her movements, and the subtle command in the tilt of her head. Emma paused briefly at the podium, allowing the soft hush to settle fully, then acknowledged the room with a slight, composed nod, a gesture that carried the weight of achievement and self-possession, signaling that she had arrived not merely as a participant, but as someone whose presence reshaped the energy of the gathering. Derek's lips pressed into a thin line as he observed her, the quiet impact of her transformation evident in the tense set of his shoulders and the narrowing of his eyes, each small movement conveying the recognition of a power dynamic now reversed. Emma's every motion, from the controlled sweep of her arm to the gentle placement of her hands on the podium, communicated assurance, calm authority, and the culmination of months of strategic effort, perseverance, and resilience. The background music provided a soft, understated accompaniment, underscoring the poised tension in the room as attendees absorbed the presence of a woman who had endured hardship and emerged elevated, refined, and undeniably influential. Every glance, every subtle reaction among the guests reinforced the unspoken narrative of triumph and reclamation, leaving the room suspended in a collective awareness of her accomplishment. Emma's eyes met Derek's for the briefest moment, steady and unwavering, a silent conveyance of the journey she had undertaken and the power she now possessed, leaving the air charged with anticipation and curiosity about how the evening would unfold as she continued to navigate the room with unwavering grace, quiet authority, and unshakable poise. The transformation complete, yet the implications of her presence lingering in the minds of all who bore witness. The night had reached a quiet crescendo, the warm glow of chandeliers casting long reflections across the polished marble floors of the Starlight Hotel ballroom, and Emma Lawson stood poised at the center, every movement measured, deliberate, and fluid, the emerald gown flowing around her like liquid authority. The soft hum of conversation, the subtle clinking of glasses, and the faint strains of the orchestra had become a backdrop to the undeniable presence she radiated, and every gaze in the room seemed drawn to her, curiosity and admiration interwoven with the unspoken acknowledgement of her transformation. Derek Harrison remained in the periphery, his posture taut, the confidence he had once relied upon replaced with a flicker of disbelief and recognition as he absorbed the reality that the woman before him was not the same as the one he had underestimated, abandoned, and left behind. Emma's eyes scanned the room, noting subtle shifts in expressions, the quiet astonishment of those who had previously dismissed her, and the gentle nods and murmurs that reinforced the silent command she held over the gathering. Her breath was calm, steady, each inhale and exhale a rhythm that underscored her composure, while her movements projected control, elegance, and the quiet assertion of authority she had cultivated over months of careful planning, persistence, and resilience. The soft scent of jasmine and cedarwood mingled with the ambient fragrance of polished wood and fine linens, enhancing the subtle yet powerful aura she projected. A presence that commanded attention without a single raised voice or overt gesture. Guests shifted slightly in their seats or turned their heads toward her, captivated by the assurance and sophistication that defined her every step, and the murmurs of recognition and admiration swirled gently through the room, emphasizing the impact of her quiet power. Derek's eyes tracked her, the slightest tension in his jaw and the imperceptible narrowing of his eyes betraying his awareness of the irreversible shift in perception, and Emma allowed herself a composed, fleeting smile, a silent acknowledgement of the journey that had brought her here, the endurance and strategy that had elevated her presence and authority. Every glance she exchanged, every subtle tilt of the head, every controlled gesture reinforced the narrative of transformation and reclamation, leaving the room attuned to her influence and silent power. The music played softly, the notes weaving through the ambient hum of the gathering, accentuating the poised tension that now filled the space. And as Emma held her gaze across the crowd, the subtle authority and calm assurance she radiated were undeniable, a testament to the patience, resilience, and strategic foresight that had shaped her into the woman standing here, fully in command, unshakable, and unmistakably in control of her narrative. In that suspended moment, every attendee sensed the quiet finality of her triumph, the elegance of her approach, and the enduring impression of her presence, leaving the evening poised on the cusp of acknowledgement, respect, and unspoken recognition, the anticipation of what would follow lingering as Emma Lawson, fully realized and irrevocably empowered, prepared to navigate the remainder of the night with effortless grace and unassailable authority.